Our first tipping point tonight, President Trump and Senator Bob Corker in a nasty feud on Twitter. Of course, the mainstream media is focused on that because they want to avoid talking about tax reform. See, this is what they do. This is what the mainstream media does. This is why the people in our country don't trust the mainstream media. They cherry pick what they want to talk about. They pick what they want to talk about based off of what they want you to hear. Stories they think will make you dislike President Trump. That's not journalism, that's political activism. In the whole scheme of things, are a few dumb tweets between the president and a disgruntled senator really that big of a deal? Not really. I'm sure before Twitter, presidents and senators said equally childish and nasty things to each other face to face. But the mainstream media chooses to talk about that because otherwise they'll be forced to confront the fact that a majority of Americans support President Trump's tax reform plan, or the collusion and corruption between Russia and the Clintons, or the defeat of ISIS in Syria, or the fact that a majority of Americans support President Trump rolling back the Obamacare birth control mandate, or the fact that unemployment is low and wages are high, consumer confidence is up, and so is the stock market. If the mainstream media is holding a story from you, hiding it from you, that should be your first clue that there's something within that story you need to know. Joining me now to delve into it, Congressman from Florida's 1st District, Representative Matt Gaetz. Congressman, thanks for being on the show, sir.
Good to be back on, Liz.
All right, Congressman, let me ask you two questions here. First of all, in regards to the political drama, the feud of the day between President Trump and Senator Bob Corker here, I think everyone realistically is following along with this. We all like to watch the gossip and the drama as it unfolds, especially when it unfolds on Twitter. I did not think that this exchange between the two of them was that big of a deal, but in my opinion was not held by much of the mainstream media and much of the left in thinking that it's not a big deal. What do you think of this? Is this serious?
Well, Liz, your show focuses on the policies that will actually impact quality of life for the American people. Unfortunately, in the mainstream media, too often we get stuck into kind of the high school locker room approach to observing the activities of our government. The bottom line is that nothing that Senator Corker thinks of President Trump or vice versa will be dispositive on the actual issues that we have to vote on. My hope is that we'll get tax cuts done, we'll improve quality of life for the American people, we'll get this economy going again. And I'm glad to say that just in anticipation of tax cuts, we already see investor confidence improving, consumer confidence improving, the stock market's up. And so when we actually get tax cuts done, we can finally have the American economy that this great country deserves.
Right. Well, listen, that's why the mainstream media is focusing on this type of petty drama, on this mudslinging, because they don't want us to talk about the meat of this policy of tax reform and tax cuts. Because, like I said in the introduction, the majority of Americans support this tax reform plan. It's just the liberal Democrats that don't. But realistically, Congressman, when we're looking at what's going to happen on the Hill between now and the end of the year, is it realistic to think that this will be passed?
Well, Congress oftentimes does its best work when there are the lowest expectations. And right now, with our fumble on health care and our inability to execute other major elements of the president's agenda, I think the heat is on every member of Congress to deliver for the American people, deliver for President Trump, and get these tax cuts passed. They're absolutely essential to get our economy moving. And, you know, Liz, you mentioned another issue earlier in the show, this Uranium One scandal. And I think you have correctly indicated that the mainstream media would rather have us focus on tweets and disagreements than what could potentially be one of the greatest scandals in American history, where our own Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, was actually selling out the interests of this country for Clinton Foundation cash. And the outcome may have been giving Vladimir Putin influence over 20% of the uranium assets that we have in this country. So that's what we should be focusing on, and we should also be focusing on ensuring that we've got the tax cuts to move the American economy forward.
Right, but of course the mainstream media won't talk about that scandal that involves Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, and the Obama administration because they were complicit in covering this up. If they had done their job, if they had investigated, we would have known about this years and years ago. Thank goodness Hillary didn't win the election, or we would have been in a lot bigger trouble. But let me go back to the tax reform plan. A lot of people are unclear about what this piece of legislation is actually going to include. We haven't heard a lot of details beyond that framework that President Trump released a couple of weeks ago, but we have heard an update from some congressional Republicans Republicans talking about adding a fourth tax bracket to Trump's proposed 3 tax brackets. That would be a tax bracket for the highest earners, and it would remain the same as it is right now, that 39.5%. And Congressman, I have to ask you, why keep that so high when the highest earners are the ones who create jobs? They're the ones who stimulate the economy. If they are giving the government such a huge percentage of their money, how would those tax cuts actually help our economy?
Well, I'm for tax cuts for all Americans. I think that when we move the economy forward by letting people keep more of their own money and making their own decision about how to use it, that ought to be prosperity that is shared by everyone. And so I think every single American deserves a tax cut. I think the government's been taking too much money from all Americans, and that's my viewpoint. But I think it's also important to remember that President Trump's real focus in this bill isn't how to improve quality of life for the wealthy. He wants to make sure that the regular folks that have felt left behind by this government for the last 8 years really see that there's someone in the White House fighting for them. And so as we get more details, and I expect that we'll actually have legislative text next week, I think we'll be able to really calculate how these great tax cuts are going to impact just good old regular American families who want to play by the rules, raise their kids, and live in a country where if they do those things, they'll be able to prosper and succeed.
Right, and I think regular middle-class Americans, the people that you're talking about, they do want a tax break in and of itself. All of us want to keep more of our paycheck in our pocket instead of giving it to the government every week. But we're also impacted by the tax rate of the highest class of earners because those are the people who pay our paychecks. If they're still paying a ton in taxes, they don't have as much to pay us. So we are impacted when those people don't experience the same tax cuts as well. Let me ask you very bluntly, would you vote for a bill that keeps the highest rate of taxes at 39.5%?
Well, I don't typically say how I'll vote on a bill before I actually read it. You know, I don't come from the Nancy Pelosi school of governing, and so I probably want to be able to view the entire bill in context with what it'll do for the overall American economy. But to your point about making sure that we've got the flexibility in the economy for job creators to be able to go and make investments in higher wages and new facilities and new branch offices, I think that we absolutely have to lower the corporate tax rate. Right now, we've got one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world in the United States, and the consequence is that jobs are sent overseas. That's not an America First agenda, and so by getting our corporate tax rate lower, by getting it in line with the rest of the industrialized world, I think that we immediately will become more competitive and we'll see fewer circumstances where these great jobs are shipped to other countries. And my hope is that we'll be able to inject the savings that companies see right into real consequences for American families and American workers.
I certainly hope so, sir. Congressman Gaetz, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.